We are very honored to have here this evening Gay Talese, who is one of the most distinguished journalists of our age. He got his start in journalism back when he was living back when he was a boy in Ocean City, New Jersey, where he still has a residence. He was assigned to phone in the scores of the football games of the school team. And there was a sort of mission creep that went on, and he started writing whole stories and sending them into the papers instead of merely phoning in the scores, and that was how he got his start. Since then, he's written about an extraordinary range of topics: the building of the Verrazano Bridge, the inside story of the New York Times, the news behind the news, the famous book, The Kingdom and the Power, a book about adultery in America and other sexual matters in America, which was a very controversial book. The book about the mafia, which amazes me. This is a man you want to be very careful talking to, because he can obviously can persuade anybody to tell him anything about whatever they do, because he inveigled himself into the Bonanno family for a sufficient period of time to be able to write an inside story of the mafia called Honor Thy Father. His most recent large book is Unto the Sons, which is a biography, if you will, a family biography, a story of his family, and woven around that the story of the war and the immigration of Italian Americans. A fascinating book. He is considered by no less an authority than Tom Wolfe to be the father of what is called the new journalism. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but my best understanding is that is, and certainly this is what Mr. Talese does extremely well. It's a writing of nonfiction that is from a novelist, almost with a novelist's eye for character and motivation and locale, and what a writing teacher of mine used to call the concrete physical detail. You feel when you read his journalism that you are not merely observing from the outside, but living the inside of what people are doing. The occasion for his being here among us tonight is the publication of this wonderful small book called The Gay Talese Reader, Portraits and Encounters. The subjects in this book are, I'm sure there's a unifying thread somewhere, but the topics include Peter O'Toole, Frank Sinatra, Joe Louis, Italian tailors, and other things. And so that will give you a clue as to what he's going to talk about tonight. Gay Talese.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Strong was wondering, what is the thread? The thread is the threading of my tailor tradition. The suit I'm wearing, the suits I have, are out of the tradition of tailoring, which is what my father practiced so artfully and so conscientiously during his 90 years. He died about 7 years ago. He was a tailor from the time of 11, apprenticed in Italy. His grandfather, his uncle, also tailors, and it was thought that I would make a wonderful tailor. I probably would have made a wonderful tailor. I care a great deal about doing things properly, tailoring that endures, not always for a lifetime, but good tailoring does go on, at least in my lifetime. Suits that I wear and can still wear have their origin sometimes as early as 1950. And I care greatly about craft. In my writing, I think sometimes I write like a tailor. This book that Mr. Strong referred to, the so-called modestly named Gay Talese Reader, is really a book that threads through my youthful days as a journalist when I started in 1955 with the New York Times, and it continues really until the very recent past, as recently as, for example, last night. Last night, at this time, I was in Madison Square Garden watching the basketball teams, the Los Angeles Lakers, play the New York Knickerbockers. And in the Madison Square Garden, I watched with great admiration the Los Angeles Lakers team as they were warming up. The great Shaquille O'Neal, this giant of a man, very athletic for a man in excess of 7 feet and 290 or 300 some pounds. The currently notorious Kobe Bryant, when he was first introduced to the audience, to the gathering of fans, if that's what they were, there was the element of booze tied into the tabloid headlines out of Colorado earlier this year. And other players recognized by some of you who are sports fans, Karl Malone. And I had a wonderful, wonderful seat. I have a cousin who writes for Hollywood, and he makes a lot of money. His name is Nicholas Pileggi, and he's married to a very successful director, Nora Ephron. So this Hollywood money bought these wonderful tickets. I think it cost Nick $80,000 a year for Nick's tickets. And he was in California with his wife Nora last night, so I inherited for this one occasion last night these tickets that are virtually practically behind the bench of the Knickerbocker team, undistinguished as it is currently. And I watched these gigantic men up close, stretching before the game, and then the build-up of the game. It wasn't much of a game, to tell you the truth. It was a rout, really. But what was interesting is during halftime, while everyone was out getting something to drink, the music came on. And it was a song by Frank Sinatra. And it was, "You Make Me Feel So Young." And it didn't make me feel so young to hear it, because I heard it when he first recorded it. And I listened to it, and I wondered, what a wonderful voice. What a wonderful orchestra, Nelson Riddle in the background. And I had written about Frank Sinatra, and it was mentioned, I think, by Mr. Strong, that's in this book. And as I was looking around at the crowd at halftime, I noticed to my left a very, very attractive young woman. She looked like Michelle Pfeiffer when Michelle Pfeiffer was 21. And next to her was a man of about her age, tall, with 2 earrings. That comes part of, my growing up. I realized it meant. And they were necking. It was halftime, Madison Square Garden, distinguished occasions such as the Knicks versus the Lakers. And here is this couple necking to the Sinatra music. And I thought, Sinatra lives, because in my youth, my 1940s youth, I was born in 1932, I'm 71, and I grew up in the age of Sinatra. As was mentioned, I was born in New Jersey, Ocean City, South Jersey, near Atlantic City. But I grew up in the 1940s when I was in high school, and later on, 1949, I went to the University of Alabama. But it was still the Sinatra period, and the music of Sinatra really was the music that brought romance into lives of people who weren't necessarily in the mood until the music put them in the mood. And so many people, I think, necking in the cars in the weeds of the 1950s with flies and bugs bouncing off the windshield and the radio batteries burning down, and the great songs of Mr. Blue Eyes, Frank Sinatra, getting people in the mood, and how it transferred into the garden last night. And here it was, living on, like enduring works, like things with threads that hang in there. Music to make love by, music to woo by, music at least to listen to in Madison Square Garden. And I felt that the book, or at least part of this book, that deals with the era of Sinatra has an enduring value, because he was, like any artist who really is an artist, resonates through his work for a long, long time after he no longer is alive. I had a busy week. The day before I went to the garden, I went to St. John the Divine Cathedral, and that was the memorial service for George Plimpton. I first met George Plimpton after I myself came to New York to stay in the 1950s. I remember that wonderful line by E.B. White, "No one should come to New York to live unless you're willing to be lucky." Willing to be lucky. And I was willing to be lucky, and I came to New York, and one of the lucky things that happened to me was meeting people like George Plimpton. I met him early. I wrote a story about him. I wrote a story about him because I used to read, as I moved out of provincial New Jersey into New York and got a job at the New York Times, I started reading The New Yorker, which I never did in New Jersey. And I read the Paris Review, which is a new magazine then, started in 1952, and I moved to New York in 1955, 56. And I met George Plimpton not long after that, and I wrote this article that's, again, in this book that we have with us tonight, published by Walker and Company. And it was George Plimpton and the Paris Review crowd. And last, let's see, what is this, Wednesday? Where are we? I forget. It was 2 days ago. There was the memorial for George Plimpton. Must have been 2,500 people. It was almost like Madison Square Garden in the sense that there was a great collection of people. And the people were some of them people whose careers started as writers for the Paris Review or having their short stories published by George Plimpton. And one of them I saw there was Philip Roth. And Philip Roth, who's my age, 70, 71, one of the most remarkable artists of my generation. His work living on. You probably have, as I have, read these wonderful recent novels the last 10 years. Some writers, when they're young, write beautifully. Hemingway, Fitzgerald, young Irwin Shaw. And then as they get older, the work, because they don't take the time or perhaps don't have the energy or perhaps don't have the sense of values as they did when they were eager and young and hungry and determined, their work diminishes in terms of importance or quality, but not so with Roth. And there he was. And also up there was William Styron. There's another man. He hasn't written a lot, but whatever Styron writes, it's quality. And there was my Norman Mailer. I love Norman Mailer. Many don't love Norman Mailer. I love Norman Mailer. I've known him, again, almost as long as I knew Plimpton. And Norman was one of the speakers at the cathedral. He got up the pulpit. The pulpit had 11 steps, and Norman crawls up there. He doesn't walk very well anymore. Roth is very agile, Philip Roth. He writes about having a bad back, but there was no signs of that in seeing him 2 days ago. But Mailer up there and addressed the crowd and talked about what it was like to travel with George Plimpton and Sarah Plimpton, George's widow, and Mailer's fifth or sixth wife, I'm not sure, Norris Church. And they had gone to Europe 2 years ago and spent 4 months traveling around Africa, different places, and Mailer was reflecting upon how much of a gentleman George was. In the gathering for the memorial service at St. John's Cathedral were not only literary types, there were football players, the old Detroit Lions, there were entertainers, there was a whole eclectic gathering of the great city that drew these people to it, people willing to be lucky. And I sat next to an old pal of mine, David Halberstam. I first met him when he joined the New York Times. It was 1960 when I first met him. I was there a few years earlier. And I sat with David, and we chatted quietly before the ceremony did begin. And he said, are you going to go to the Knicks game tomorrow? I said, yeah. He said, you know who's going to be there? No. He said, Joan Didion's going to be at the game. I said, why would Joan Didion go to the game? He said, oh, she's writing something about Kobe Bryant. Isn't that interesting? Here I am in this cathedral marking, not mourning, but celebrating the life of Plimpton and the Paris Review crowd. As you know, the Paris Review was born in the 1950s in Paris, but really what George Plimpton and Peter Matheson and H.L. Humes, John P.C. Train, and William Styron, and others that were living in Paris in the 1950s, Rose Styron, his wife, what they were doing was evoking some of the spirit of the City of Lights in the 1920s, the era of the Fitzgeralds and Hemingway and Gertrude Stein. And these young men and women from Harvard and Yale and other fine universities, Plimpton leading the group, went to Paris in 1950-51 and started this quality magazine, American magazine, in Paris. And it was a time when being in Paris was the place to be. It was the capital of literature at that time. It was the place where, in the 1940s and 50s, works that were banned in this country because they were considered obscene, and that did include D.H. Lawrence's work, Henry Miller's work. I remember Lady Chatterley was banned in the United States in 1959. I remember that specifically because I covered the story of its being liberated from the realm of the obscene works. And but Plimpton and those people of that generation, 4 or 5 years younger than myself, really were in the right time, Paris, in the 1950s, in the right place, of course. I was thinking about how Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld refers to Paris and France and old Europe, and it was, I guess, to the Rumsfeld view, old Europe. But to me, when Plimpton were there, it was the place to be. But when Plimpton and the group moved back to New York, which they did in the late 50s, that's when I met George, New York became, not incidentally, the new Paris. I think the era of de Gaulle, conservative, France became a bit less adventuresome and tolerant. Certainly I remember the Lolita book, which was banned in Charles de Gaulle's France, was not in our own country, and so was many books that had been available in Paris in the 50s, 40s, were not so available in the 1960s, when the reverse was true in New York and other places, I'm sure Boston among them. But Plimpton was really part of, like in a way like Sinatra, started something that I do think, through his love of literature, through the people the Paris Review published, and the Paris Review, you might know because of the obituary being published quite widely, Plimpton's will determined that the Paris Review will live on, and it will live on, at least as long as there are people that care about writing and discovering young writing. But when Halberstam mentioned Didion, and I went to the game last night, I was looking all over for Didion. She's such a small person. You can't find her very easily. She's a tiny little person. I didn't find her, but I wondered, Kobe Bryant, why would she want to write about him? And I think, well, maybe because he's California, L.A. Lakers. She writes in her new book is about California. And I was thinking about why this man, Kobe Bryant, distinguished as a basketball player, now has this other dark sense of celebrity about him because of this alleged scandal that he was involved in. And then I was thinking about California, and I was thinking about scandal, and I was thinking about the movie business. I was thinking all this during the moment after I saw the people who were embracing at halftime cease to embrace one another because the second half had begun, but I'm still in my stream of conscious elsewhere. And I thought that it really is a new America that I, as an old journalist, not a new journalist, but an old journalist, I never liked the term. I admire and grateful to Tom Wolfe. I admire Tom Wolfe, and I'm grateful for the flattery he focused upon me when he calls me one of the forefathers of, or the creators of this so-called new journalism. Mr. Strong said he didn't know exactly what that meant. I don't exactly know what that means. It doesn't mean I don't like it really, because new journalism, parenthetically speaking, represented to me a kind of sensationalism. I believe sensationalism grew out not out of anything that the Wolf did or I did or anyone else, but really came out of the Watergate period when Woodward and Bernstein, not that they aren't fine reporters, I mean that the idea of becoming a celebrity journalist, I do believe, comes out of Woodward Bernstein. And I do believe that many people in journalism schools, young people, like the idea of being stars, and like the idea of having that kind of power to topple a government, worthy of toppling, no doubt, but nevertheless, that kind of power of the written word, the journalistic word, was such during that Woodward Bernstein phenomenal event that a lot of the younger people, and I'm afraid some of them thought they were new journalists, saw it as a career of opportunism, which it should not be. It should be a career dedicated to reliable, factual reporting. It should be dedicated to being what I think of it as a worthy calling of journalism, to be foot soldiers for the historians, to get the facts right, and to be setting a record straight. Writing as I did, as the New York Times, I always thought of it as the paper of record, so that people could go back 50 years after you're dead and look in the files and find something that was accurate. And I always thought that was what was noble about journalism. You got there first, get the facts right, and historians might well make something of it, or at least document parts of something that they didn't know firsthand, when you knew firsthand and you got it right firsthand, first time. So Didion goes to the garden. I don't see her, but I'm thinking about journalism because I'm thinking about Kobe Bryant. And I'm thinking about how different journalism was when I first came to New York and I met Plimpton, and I first got a job in the repertorial staff. It was in the 50s, and we had scandals in the 50s. We had scandals in the 60s. But we did not, because it was not considered news, not considered news, we didn't exploit people the way I think goes on today. And it wasn't that we were naive or unaware of the frailty or the flaws of human nature. We had a president, we had civil rights leaders, we don't have to mention names, who had a little bit of dalliance known about them. But it wasn't until they violated what it was that made them special, their sense of leadership, their capacity to perform, whatever it was. As long as they had a private life, if they had a private life, it was not considered within the realm of public disclosure. There was a willingness on the part of newspapers or the media generally to allow people to have a private life. And if they did violate it or go public with their private life, then it was reported. If they went public with their private life, it was worthy of coverage. I just thought of something. Just thought about a month ago I was in Stromboli. My wife and I took a sailing. We went on a cruise from Sicily up to Rome, and we stopped in Stromboli, and it occurred to me that Ingrid Bergman made a film. I didn't see the film called Stromboli. All I remember was the big scandal. It was all the papers, Roberto Rossellini and Ingrid Bergman. And Strombli's been famous ever since, that rickety island. You know, there's nothing on Stromboli. It's a terrible place to go. But because these lovers in 1949 or 51, or I don't remember when it was, but that was they did it. That wasn't so disreputable of newspapers or photographers, the paparazzi, the pre-paparazzi, to go after that story. But I was thinking of Kobe Bryant, how he was. I'm not defending, I don't know what happened, but I'm saying none of us know what happened. But already the booze in the garden last night, and Joan Didion somewhere are going to write about this. I can't believe in the New York Review of Books, but somewhere. And I went out after the game. It was raining. Went across the street with another pal of mine, A.E. Hotchner by name. He's a pal of Paul Newman, and they just have a book now out about the spaghetti sauce and the other things that Paul Newman does, you know, the Newman's Own. This is his pal, A.E. Hotchner, and they have this book out, and the Nick Pileggi norepinephrine seats that I had I gave to my pal, Hotchner. And we went across the street to the old Pennsylvania Hotel and had dinner till about, a couple martinis, and I got home at 2 o'clock. And I woke up this morning and I got on the train. And I got on the train to come to Boston. And I opened the New York Times. And what do I see at the top of the page? I see Michael Jackson at the top of the page. What is going on here? No, this is my paper. It's the paper of record. It's a paper of responsibility. And I'm still thinking about Didion doing Kobe, and I'm thinking about me getting older, and I'm thinking about Mailer talking about Plimpton, and I'm thinking about a lot of things and how life is changing. And I'm wondering where I am. I know I'm in Boston. I'm on the train to Boston. And I'm reading Michael Jackson. I think, this is not really a New York Times story, is it? It's above the fold. I don't know if you people read it. And I'm thinking, it is a new America. And I'm thinking, if I was the editor of the New York Times, it wouldn't be there. I'm thinking, you're an old guy. You're an old-fashioned fellow. You're not with it. And then I'm thinking, no, I'm with it. I'm into sort of threads that last, and I'm into certain standard and style, and something that isn't going to be so exploitive of or just sailing of people's character. I don't know anything about Michael Jackson. I don't listen. I mean, I don't even know I know he's super famous. But what do we know about the word abuse? Abuse, what does it mean anymore? The language has changed so much in my lifetime as a journalist. We would define things. If someone was abusive, and I was the editor, I was the reporter, I would really find out what was done to cause a person to report abuse done to one's person. That would be specific. There's a lack of specificity now in journalism. There's a kind of great emptiness in terms of use of language, of imprecision, and an assault on character of people who are famous in this age of celebrity. Perhaps we can blame Woodward Bernstein, but I wouldn't. I might blame television, but I'm not sure. I know that magazines, when I was writing for magazines, didn't have to have a movie star on the cover. I do know now you don't see anything except movie stars on the covers. I know if I were working for magazines today, I wouldn't want to interview people because I wouldn't want to care. I don't care what movie stars think. But then I thought, when I used to write for magazines, I didn't ever talk to Frank Sinatra. As the Post-Esquire said, it's the best piece ever done. I hope I'm not sounding immodest about it, but I never talked to the man. And maybe it's good because you don't really want to hear what great people say. I heard him sing. I heard him sing last night. You make me feel so young. I felt this is history. It's the history of a voice, transcends time, comes out of the grave, and gets two people to neck in halftime of Madison Square Garden. And then Kobe Bryant gets back on the field, on the court, and Shaquille O'Neal, and Karl Malone, and all these giants of their game. And the second half came, and the Knickerbockers were annihilated. And I went across to the Pennsylvania Hotel, had 2 martinis in celebration of You Make Me Feel So Young. And here I am, trained up here and reading about Michael Jackson. And where are we? I don't know. Except I'm very glad to be here. And I would like to know if there's anybody that has any comment or questions to ask, because it could well be that I'm on such a tangent that none of you people are hearing what you want to hear. I have some time, do I not, Mr. Strong? Sir, ask me a question. Look at them. You're curious about something.
I'm going to leave my questions for last.
Okay. Well, yes, ma'am. The question is, what do I think of Eric Sevareid? I think that great CBS team of the post-World War II period, Sevareid, the great Edward R. Murrow, Charles Collingwood, a lot of them that you who are a little older probably heard. I don't know. I'm sure there's some in this room that did. We come out of the age of the radio. And I just thought he was great. I saw him on television, too. But there are people, I don't want to sound too disrespectful of the journalism of my time, meaning the journalists who are still in the business. There are some, but I do believe that the age of celebrity has penetrated to a degree that I find distasteful, and I do believe that I think it was disgusting of Michael Jackson's story to be on the New York Times front page, but nobody cares what I think. Certainly the New York Times, but I have First Amendment privileges in this distinguished place, so I give you my opinion. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Did you feel that the observation that Howell Raines had moved the editorial page to the front page of the New York Times was justified?
The question has to do with Howell Raines. Howell Raines, as you probably do know, is no longer with the New York Times, and you surely know why. I knew Howell Raines. He graduated a little later than I did from the University of Alabama, but he is a Southerner, and I knew him before he became the significant editor of the editorial page and later on executive editor. And though I'm not a Southerner, my new book, which I'm going to finish by February, and I've been working on it for, I'm afraid, 8 years is about right. But part of it deals with civil rights in Alabama. It deals with the age of from the Civil War right to the Battle of Selma. And I know a good deal about Birmingham, not only because I went to school in Alabama, but I covered, and when I was still on the New York Times in the 1960s, I did a lot of reporting. Not the headline reporting, I did the feature stories. And in 1962, I returned to the University of Alabama and interviewed for the New York Times the first black woman first black student to graduate, Vivian Malone by name. And in 1965, I was back in Selma and Birmingham. That was the era of Bull Connor and Sheriff Jim Clark. I was there in Selma for 6 weeks, from March through the spring to the summer of '65. So I'm interested in that. And Howell Raines comes out of Alabama. And I think he came out of, I think he was born in Birmingham. And I think he brought a sensibility to the city of New York. I'm not going to suggest anything more than that, except that I do believe that his hiring of Jason Blair, or tolerating Jason Blair being the reporter who was so abominably sloppy and stupid, I think Howell Raines, being a Southerner, tolerated more than I would, and certainly more than my friend A.M. Rosenthal, who was also had that position, or Max Frankel. These were other executive editors before Raines. I think it was unfortunate for Raines, but unfortunate more for the New York Times to have that happen. And here I am sort of giving the New York Times such an elevated status, and yet who puts Michael Jackson on the cover? I mean, can't blame that on Howell Raines, and I think it's just terrible judgment. But an old grad talking, but yes, sir, right in the aisle. Well, you're next. This looks like young John Updike up here, but not quite.
What did you think, talking about acts, what did you think of H.L. Mencken?
Oh, Mencken. Well, he's a little before my. There's a wonderful book. I guess you read the biography that's just out last year. Mencken was one healthy spirit. With all his cynicism, he was so brilliant. I grew up, being aware of Mencken, and through my friend Russell Baker, who was from Baltimore, I got to hear him because his uncle knew Mencken. But I think Mencken, I wish we had a Mencken today. I wish we had a Mencken to write about Rumsfeld and write about our policy. I wish we had, the journalism today, I sound like a curmudgeon. I sound like A.J. Liebling. You remember Liebling used to have a column in the New Yorker about the press, the Wayward Press, I think it was called. But I wish we had a kind of Mencken to cite the hypocrisy, the posturing, the false virtue, sense of virtue that's coming out of Washington. I think, forget what one's position is on anything. The press has been not only inclined to go with what is exploitive of celebrity, but also timidity toward power in the Pentagon. That's the press. I don't have a lot of respect for what's going on now. But in the back, there was a question.
You talked about journalism. I don't know what you call it when it's on the television. Certainly not journalism. I'd be interested in your comments on, for instance, CNN in the morning. I mean, everything you said is borne out, the inanity of it, the dwelling on celebrity. It's not news, it's not journalism. I think it's everything you said to the umpteenth power.
I think an example, we're talking about, as you all heard, I'm sure, about the so-called journalism that comes out of television. The Reagan, I didn't see what happened to the show that I believe CBS was going to have on President Reagan, then it shifted off to some, I just think that is abominable. I don't know why when you have, when fact is so fantastic, when real life is sometimes so beyond the imagination of those who make up stories, if you could only get the facts right, if you don't do enough research, dig deeply into the story of a Reagan, or I mean, think of Reagan, an actor, not a great actor, becoming president of the United States, and moreover, a successful president of the United States. Now, I know Edmund Morris did a serious work, but it was not vilified, but considered flawed because Morris had this imaginary character named, I can't remember, but it sort of took that book out of the realm of very serious biography, which Edmund Morris himself, with his Theodore Roosevelt books, personified. I think what's at issue here is not being able to define clearly, as so much is not defined clearly these days, of what differs fiction from nonfiction or nonfiction from fiction. I believe that they are very, very distinguishable. They are not to be, I believe as a nonfiction writer, I'm a nonfiction writer. I'm a writer that wants to have, as much as I'm capable of creating the truth, I know I cannot define that, but I am careful with my facts. And if I write something, it's the real name. I don't make up scenes that are not verified by 3 or 4 people who were there, if I wasn't there. But I take pride in, and I'm sure that the great historians, I'm not a historian, but to get it right. And you don't have to make anything up, because life is so extraordinary. I mean, Schwarzenegger, I mean, when I talk about, I mean, I should have mentioned, when I talk about Didion, I mean, maybe Didion is not doing Kobe Bryant. Maybe she was there to do something on, I don't know, maybe Frank Sinatra for all I know. But Arnold Schwarzenegger is an extraordinary story. I mean, a serious biography. You don't have to make anything up. And I felt, again, the press went after him on the sexual. I mean, the LA Times, when they went after him on sometime before the election day, dredging up the notions of harassment or whatever by people who weren't named in most cases, I thought it was reprehensible. I don't care anything about the politics of anybody. I'm not that political a person. I just think there's a sense of fairness that has been diminished within what we loosely call media. And I don't think it was there when I was indoctrinated into the world in 1955 when I got my first chance to be a journalist at the Times, and it was the only job I had. I stayed 10 years and then I left, and I never wrote for a daily paper again, but I've always been close to it, and I always thought of it as my training, and I always believed that I should try to be true as I could be to the truth, as much as we journalists could get it. Yes, sir.
Now that we have so many sources for news, CNN, Fox, and many other channels, people younger than myself all get their news from various internet sites, not the newspapers at all. What do you think is the current status and the future of the concept paper of record?
What is the concept of the paper of record? What is the concept today? And you mentioned sources. I think one of the problems today is the sources are not identified. I would want to have sources identified. I don't want to have an unnamed source, someone high up in the State Department, or I don't believe the reporters. I am so mistrusting of journalists anyway. And I do believe that the sources, when they know they're going to be unidentified, can be a little freer, and sometimes maliciously so, with regard to the information imparted to the press. I think if we made people stand up, and I believe this is true of Woodward Bernstein, I believe that whoever Deep Throat was, or the Deep Throats, let's say there are 50 of them, I don't know, they were so determined, and rightly perhaps, to want Nixon out of there, that they would have finally gotten their names on record as being, talk about the plumbers and G. Gordon Liddy and all that. I think if you can hold people, I mean, I've done this in my books, as Mr. Strong said. When I got to the Mafia, their names are in there. When he mentioned, he didn't mention Thy Neighbor's Wife, but that's the book that I am most criticized for writing, but I'm very proud of having written that book. And that book dealt with adultery in America. I come out of a Catholic past, a parish priest, and all the sense of sin that I received circa 1944, 45, 46. And I grew into the 1960s wondering what is going on in America. What was sinful when I was an altar boy in 1944, and which continued in even my Alabama years as a student from 1949 to 1953. Then in 1960, 61, 62, what was forbidden, what was obscene in 49 was not obscene in 63, and I was curious about the redefinition of morality. That book was about, a redefining of morality. Journalism, in that book I used real names, even if it's dealing with adultery, which that book does deal with. I use real names. I didn't ever use, if I can't get people to stand up to what they tell me, or to be identified, I don't want to use them, because I am a paper of record. Even if I'm writing a book, I'm keeping a record. I'm a record keeper. And I want to have the reader know that if they have some doubts, they can call up people and say, did Talese get this right? I want to stand by that a judgment of the reader. But sourcing today, in even the New York Times is very suspect. So one thing I would never do if I had any power, which I don't, which is probably why I don't have any power, but I wouldn't let him. I mean, I'm a vigilante in this way. I'm a vigilante for virtue, but I don't know if I'm a vigilante for virtue. But I do believe standards have to be upheld, and I don't like reading in the newspaper people not named and yet stories according to sources. And I've written letters to the editor, and not this editor, but the one before Raines, named Joe Lillyveld. Joe Lillyveld was the man who had the job before Hal Raines. And I once found in the New York Times, in 11 different stories, the information came from unnamed sources, defined differently, and he never answered the letter. I'm just a crank. Any other? Excuse me, Mr. Strong. Now, I don't want to overstay. It's 7 o'clock. Tell me when we should. I mean, I can stay here all night because I'm having a good time, but I think these people are responsible. Tell me how much.
Well, I think we can take a few more questions.
Okay. All right. So this one and that one. The two gents of close to my age. Not really. You're tenure. You're not.
In terms of our cult of celebrity,
Yes.
it seems to me that part of that is that the media feel that the whole world is their oyster. They have a right to intrude everywhere, and into some of the things that not appear to be honest. Do you feel there
The question is, in this time where it seems anything goes with media, do they have any sense that they should back off? Is that what you're saying?
Behind that is a comparison of when you first started out.
Right.
There's a difference there.
When I first joined the paper, there were decisions made, I later became privy to these, that we will not go with this story because this story is not relevant. This story is not pertinent. This story is beside the point. Yes, it's interesting, but it's not. We cannot have this go public, not because we were told we couldn't or we're censorship. No. There was a certain, I'm not saying it was a self-censorship, a certain sense of decorum, good taste. That's what it was. There is not good taste today, and that's because the management, that's because the owners do not have good taste, as was the case probably with their forebears. In the case of the Sulzberger family, there's a young Sulzberger there who doesn't have the taste of his father and doesn't have the taste of his grandfather. I mean, it seems like every generation is dumbing down. It's just like Senator Moynihan said, Patrick Moynihan, dumb and dumb. It's getting bad. But maybe it's because I'm so old that I'm sounding this way. I don't know. No, thank you. Question over here. Yes. Is there a question about him? Okay, the question is about what do I think of Tom Friedman? He mentions I think he's good. I think that as I saw the great L.A. Lakers last night, they weren't the L.A. Lakers of 5 years ago, and 5 years from now be a whole different team. I think columnists also get tired. It's exhausting to be bright, even twice a week. And in the beginning, they really are, maybe because they're new voices. I think Friedman's become, if you want to know my opinion, a little predictable. And I think he's a little predictable. I know what I'm going to get out of him because I know him. I don't know him. I know him from seeing him, Columbia University Pulitzer Prize winning luncheons, and I'm sometimes there, and I know he's won 3 times. But we have a new voice, David Brooks. Now, David Brooks, I only became aware of because I loved his television exchanges with Shields. What's his name? Mark Shields. Boy, I'm sorry, I missed that in this town. Mark Shields. But David Brooks hasn't yet gotten his voice, his wonderful television persona, because he has a twinkle about him, and no matter what he is expressing with regard to a political view, he is charming. And now he had a couple of good columns recently, David Brooks. He's new. He'll get his voice. Bill Sapphire had a terrific voice for a couple of years. He's gotten tired. The thought is maybe he's going to be replaced soon. Maureen Dowd, wonderful for a while. And she's not working hard enough. She's getting, this is Joe Liebling here criticizing the press. I shouldn't be doing this, but that's why you have me here. I think she's a little bit, not strident, but I think I'd like her to do more legwork. She's winging it. Friedman isn't winging it yet, but he's on the issue of the Middle East. I know everything. I mean, I'm never going to get a new attitude about him, from him on anything. But it's a very difficult. Russell Baker, who I admired so much because he was more literary, even though he was a political journalist at heart. You get tired. My aspiration for a while, when I worked under Abe Rosenthal, and when I was on the New York Times, the power was out of Washington. Scotty Reston was the power in terms of appointing people to be columnists or get jobs on the op-ed page. And they're all Reston appointees. Anthony Lewis, who recently left. Anthony Lewis, when he retired from the column perhaps a year ago, was the last of the Reston appointees. Max Frankel had a column, and Russell Baker and others. The New York office was dominated by Washington. I wrote a book about it. But Abe Rosenthal, who was my Scotty Reston, didn't have the power with the Sulzberger family to get me a column or to get other people in New York. We didn't have that. And I was disappointed. I wanted a column. I didn't get what I wanted. I left the paper not because of that, but I sometimes, not sometimes, all the time, think the worst thing could have ever happened to me is if I had a column. Granted, I pitched for it. I didn't get it when I was 29, 30, 31 years old. But if I'd gotten a column, I would have wasted 3 or 4 years. I wouldn't have been able to do the reporting. I would have gotten into the... Sometimes you find your voice and it gets to be a little easier, and then it gets to be a little too easy. And I think that's why you should change columnists every few years. Do I have one more question? You're in charge.
Let's take 2 more questions.
2 more questions. Okay, you choose the people. I'm out of it.
Let's see. Yes, ma'am.
I was curious why a boy from New Jersey chose to go to the University of Alabama in the late 40s and what he learned on that journey.
The question is, why did a boy from New Jersey go to the University of Alabama, and what did I learn? I went because I had a parochial school education, and I was not very smart, at least in terms of grades. And I graduated from high school in 1949 when a lot of GIs were in college. It was very difficult to get into any university then. And even though I was in New Jersey, I would never have thought of applying to Princeton. I did apply to Rutgers. It was turned down. And I had a father, as I told you, who was a great tailor. And in my little town of Ocean City, there was a doctor from Birmingham. My father made suits for him. And when it looked like I wouldn't get into any college at all, Dr. Aldrich Crowe said, the doctor from Birmingham, "Oh, Joe, my father, Joe Talese, I can get him in." It got me in Alabama. It was like a football scholarship, but it was a kind of it was like they had an Italian affirmative act. You know, I was a token Italian on there. Then what did I got? I loved it. I loved going to Alabama because I saw a different side of America, a different history, the history of the South. And it wasn't unlike the history that my Italian father came from, because the south of Italy, which was conquered by the north, by Garibaldi's army in 1865, concurrent with the American invasion of north on south and how it affected the agrarian economy. I had a whole sense of history from my ancestral Italian background and my University of Alabama background that I'm writing about in this book, so I learned a lot. We have one more question?
Who was the gentleman that wanted the last word? Was that you or you? No?
I wouldn't bring the subject of Dorothy at all.
Oh, he's in town. He's in the back. Watch out.
I'm very much enjoying the free-range question format here.
Disorganized, that's what it is.
My question is, I want to admit also publicly that I'm from New York and was very impressed by your work as
How did you get in this organization? How did you get in here?
from the back.
Okay, back there. Okay. Question. Yeah, sorry.
Question. It's a two-part question. The role of the ombudsman in the newspaper. What does that mean to you? First part. Second part is, do they really do the work that they're supposed to be doing?
Question has to do with ombudsman in the New York Times, and do they do the work they're supposed to do? Danny Okren, I think is his name. New York Times is appointed man. I saw him recently, about 2 weeks ago, and I asked him that very question. The question is, are you going to really, since you have permission from the ownership of the New York Times to do anything you want, and no one can edit you, and if there's any of the readers write letters, you're going to deal with it? He said he would. Okren said. And I think that's wonderful that the Times finally gave to us inside outsider, a man within the building who doesn't have to be worried about his job because of the bureaucracy or his superiors disagreeing with him. I think it's very healthy, and I think New York Times owes it to its readers, because the New York Times has been disgraceful. And if the New York Times is disgraceful, all of journalism is disgraceful, because journalism has rightly regarded the New York Times as a serious paper. And I do believe it's a serious paper. But I find today, with examples like Michael Jackson on today's paper, I know it's in the Boston Globe too, but I'm just picking on the New York Times today. I just think that there's something wrong there. Something wrong with that paper. And I think that that they acknowledge it in bringing, for the first time, that paper has been a paper of record, supposedly, for 130-some years. Or at least since Mr. Ox took it over, which was in 1870-something. So it's been a serious paper. Ox made that. Adolph Ox is the genius of the New York Times, not the Sulzbergers that married into the Ox family. That man is alive. When I think of the quintessential journalism of believability, it's Ox who is my hero. And when I went to school, to Ocean City High School, I look up in the building in stone, OCHS. And I thought, when I worked for the New York Times, I thought it was preordained that I would be here. Thank you very much.